when love was a dangerous whisper, and stolen glances could ignite a scandal. How far would you dare to go for a secret meeting with your beloved? What hidden corners of the world from the 5th to the 15th century offered a moment of illicit closeness only to threaten everything if discovered? Number 1. The Whispering Gallery of the Cathedral. Imagine a grand cathedral, its stone walls soaring upwards, reaching towards the heavens. Sunlight filtered through stained glass painted the cold floor in vibrant hues. The air, though quiet, was never truly silent. Echoes of prayers, the shuffle of worshippers, the distant creak of a heavy door all mingled together. But within this sacred space there existed a secret, a place known as the Whispering Gallery, high above the nave, often a narrow walkway running along the inner circumference of the dome or a large arch. It was designed with an architectural quirk that made it perfect for surreptitious communication. Due to a remarkable acoustic phenomenon, a whisper uttered against the wall on one side of the gallery could be heard clearly on the opposite side, even if it was a great distance away. For medieval lovers trapped by the watchful eyes of their families, the prying ears of servants, and the strictures of society, this gallery became a dangerous but alluring meeting point. A young noblewoman, perhaps engaged against her will to an older lord, might arrange to meet her true love there. She would arrive for vespers or morning mass, her chaperone nearby, her face demurely veiled. Her lover, a squire or a younger knight from a rival house, would also be present, feigning piety. They would navigate the crowded aisles, seemingly by chance, until they found themselves ascending the winding stone steps to the gallery. Once there, amidst the other curious visitors or pilgrims admiring the views, they would position themselves on opposite sides. A hushed word spoken barely above a breath would travel along the curved wall, delivering messages of longing despair or plans for a desperate future. The risk was immense. Cathedrals were centers of community life, constantly monitored by clergy, sacristans, and pious townsfolk. Prolonged stay in the gallery, too many visits, or a gesture too bold could easily draw unwanted attention. The voices, though whispers, carried clearly to the intended listener, but also in theory to anyone else pressing their ear to the wall nearby. Curious child, a suspicious servant, or even a watchful priest might overhear a fragment of a forbidden conversation. Historians often speak of the pervasive nature of gossip in medieval towns, how quickly a rumor could spread like wildfire through the narrow streets and crowded marketplaces. For a noblewoman, discovery meant utter ruin, a forced marriage, banishment to a convent, or a lifetime of shame. For a man, it could mean a duel, loss of patronage, or even imprisonment, especially if the woman was of higher standing or already betrothed. Despite the perils, the allure of the Whispering Gallery was undeniable. Offered a fleeting sense of intimacy, a chance to communicate directly soul to soul, without the fear of letters being intercepted or messengers being interrogated. Cold stone walls, echoing with ancient prayers, became temporary confidants to forbidden desires. The vastness of the cathedral, which ordinarily felt oppressive in its grandeur, paradoxically offered a kind of anonymity in its sheer scale. Lovers could lose themselves amidst the scores of others, each absorbed in their own thoughts or devotions, making a clandestine exchange seem almost invisible. The very sanctity of the place, meant for spiritual reflection, was twisted into a tool for earthly passion, adding a layer of ironic defiance to their dangerous tryst. The sunlight shifting through the stained glass, casting fleeting patterns on the worn stone, served as a silent, beautiful timer for their precious, perilous moments together. They knew that at any moment, the illusion of privacy could shatter, exposing their deepest secret to the unforgiving scrutiny of the medieval world. Number 2. The forest's deepest heart, far from paths. The medieval forest was a place of wild beauty and profound danger. It was not the tamed woodland of today, but a vast sprawling expanse, often covering hundreds of square miles. For the common folk, it provided timber, game, and forage. For the nobility, it was a hunting ground, a symbol of their power and dominion. But for forbidden lovers, it was a sanctuary, a place where the rigid social rules of the village or the castle walls held little sway. Deep within its heart, far from the well-worn paths, the watchful eyes of the lord's gamekeepers or the prying ears of fellow villagers, a couple could steal a moment of privacy. Getting to such a place was a perilous journey in itself. The forest was thick with undergrowth, fallen trees, and hidden bogs. Wild animals roamed freely, wolves, boars, and even bears in some regions, posing a constant threat. Outlaws and brigands also lurked in the shadows, preying on unwary travelers. A man and a woman meeting alone in the woods would immediately raise suspicions if seen. A young peasant girl caught wandering off the path could be accused of poaching or meeting a rogue. A noblewoman, if she dared to venture out unchaperoned, risked not only her reputation but her physical safety. Yet, for the desperate, the risk was deemed worth it. They would choose a secluded clearing, perhaps near a babbling brook or beneath the sheltering canopy of an ancient oak tree, a place known only to them. They might arrive separately at different times, approaching from different directions so as not to be seen together on the road. The woman might claim to be gathering herbs or berries, her basket a flimsy disguise. The man might pretend to be hunting, his bow or axe a convenient prop. They would meet under the cover of twilight when the last rays of the sun filtered through the leaves, or in the early dawn before the world truly awoke. The sounds of the forest, the rustling of leaves, the chirping of birds, the distant hoot of an owl provided a natural screen for their whispered words and stolen kisses. The forest represented freedom, a wildness that mirrored the untamed passion they felt. Away from the strictures of the manor house or the village square, they could shed the masks of their social roles. A knight might confess his true feelings to a low-born maiden, or a married woman might find solace in the arms of a younger man she truly loved. The consequences of discovery were severe. If a peasant couple were caught, they might face public shaming, beatings, or even banishment from the village, especially if one was already betrothed. For nobles, it could mean the loss of lands, titles, or even an accusation of witchcraft or sorcery, given the superstitious nature of the times and the fear of the wild. The forest was often seen as a place where the devil himself might lurk, making secret meetings there doubly suspicious. Yet, for a brief time in the heart of the ancient wood, they were simply two people in love, unbound by the chains of medieval society. The smell of damp earth and pine needles filled the air, the soft moss beneath their feet, the gentle murmur of the wind through the branches, all became witnesses to their secret. It was a fleeting, perilous peace, a tiny bubble of freedom in a world that sought to control every aspect of life, especially love. They knew their time was limited, that the shadows would deepen or the first light of dawn would break, forcing them back to their separate, constrained lives. But for those precious moments, the forest was theirs alone. Number 3. The darkened alleyways of the city. Medieval cities, even in their bustling grandeur, harbored a labyrinth of narrow, winding alleyways, dark and often choked with refuse. These were not the grand thoroughfares where merchants displayed their wares or nobles paraded their finery. These were the veins and capillaries of the urban sprawl tucked away between tall buildings, behind taverns, or leading to dead ends. They were often unlit at night, relying only on the sliver of moonlight that might penetrate the high walls or the occasional spill of light from a distant window or open doorway. For medieval lovers seeking a forbidden encounter, These shadowed passages offered a tantalizing, if dangerous, opportunity for discretion. A young apprentice, smitten with the daughter of a rival guild master, or a servant girl with a crush on the Lord's son, might find these alleys their only recourse. The city, during the day, was a cacophony of sounds. The clatter of carts, the cries of hawkers, the ceaseless chatter of crowds. But at night, especially after the curfew bell had rung, and most honest folk were safely indoors, the alleys became eerily quiet, save for the scurrying of rats or the distant sound of a watchman's call. This relative silence and darkness were precisely what made them attractive. Arranging a meeting was a clandestine affair. Coded message, a dropped handkerchief, or a seemingly accidental bump in the marketplace might signal a time and place. The lovers would arrive separately, often wrapped in cloaks to obscure their identity, moving swiftly through the streets, trying to blend into the shadows. The woman might claim she was visiting a sick aunt or fetching water from a distant well. The man might say he was returning from a late night at his workshop or an errand for his master. Once in the alley, their senses would be heightened. The smell of damp stone, stagnant water, and human waste, the feel of rough walls against their hands, the sounds of their own quickened breaths. The risks were numerous and immediate. These alleys were prime hunting grounds for cutpurses, robbers, and other unsavory characters who lurked in the darkness. A sudden rustle, a misplaced step, or an unexpected encounter could lead to violence or exposure. The city watch, though often sparse, patrolled with a keen eye for suspicious activity, and two individuals meeting in the dead of night would certainly draw attention. Moreover, even if they avoided criminals or the watch, the risk of being recognized by a nosy neighbor or a busybody servant was ever present. Reputations were easily tarnished, and a mere sighting of a man and woman alone in an alley could spark a ruinous rumor. For a peasant couple, such a discovery could mean public humiliation or a forced, unwanted marriage to cover the scandal. For those of higher standing, the stakes were even greater. A noblewoman caught in such a situation could face disinheritance, banishment, or forced religious seclusion. A nobleman could suffer a blow to his honor and standing. Yet, in those brief stolen moments, pressed against the cold, damp stone, their hearts beating in unison, the risks faded in comparison to the desperate need for contact. Quick embrace, a whispered word of love or despair, a shared secret under the unforgiving gaze of the moon, these were the treasures they sought. The alley, though dangerous and foul, became a fleeting sanctuary, a place where their forbidden desires could momentarily breathe before the encroaching dawn or the threat of discovery forced them back into the strictures of their public lives. Number 4. The cellar of the inn, after closing. In the heart of many medieval towns, the inn served as a focal point for travelers, merchants, and locals seeking warmth, sustenance, and company. It was a bustling, noisy place, filled with the clatter of tankards, the murmur of conversation, and the aroma of roasted meats and stale ale. But beneath the common room usually lay the cellar, a cool, damp, and often neglected space where barrels of ale and wine were stored alongside sacks of grain and forgotten provisions. After the last patron had stumbled out into the night and the innkeeper had extinguished the lamps in the public areas, this cellar became a potential, though highly risky, rendezvous point for forbidden lovers. A servant working at the inn, perhaps a chambermaid or a stable boy, might arrange to meet a beloved from outside the establishment, someone they could not openly associate with. Or perhaps a lord traveling with his retinue might slip away to meet a local woman he had encountered during his stay, knowing that the prying eyes of his own servants were ever present in his chambers. The darkness and the heavy, earthy smell of the cellar offered a crude form of privacy that was almost impossible to find elsewhere in the communal medieval world. The arrangement would require careful planning and a deep understanding of the inn's routines. The lover on the outside would have to approach discreetly, perhaps through a back entrance or a forgotten cellar door, known only to those familiar with the building. The lover within would have to ensure the innkeeper and other staff were asleep, their footsteps light and silent as they descended the creaking wooden steps into the subterranean gloom. The only light might be a tiny hooded lantern, carefully shielded, casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn stone walls and the imposing bulk of the barrels. The risks were substantial. The innkeeper, though perhaps heavy with drink, could awaken at any sound, and discovery by them would mean immediate dismissal for any servant and potentially a public scandal. Other servants sleeping in shared quarters might also stir. The cellars themselves were not necessarily safe from vermin, and a startled rat or a collapsing stack of barrels could create noise. Furthermore, the very presence of a person not authorized to be there after hours was suspicious, and could lead to accusations of theft or worse. For a noble being caught in such a place with a commoner would be a devastating blow to their reputation, potentially leading to social ostracism or even violence from the woman's family or community. Yet in those fleeting moments, amidst the earthy aroma of fermenting liquids and the oppressive silence of the cellar, the lovers found a desperate intimacy. They might share a hurried embrace, a whispered promise, or a mournful farewell. Cold, damp air, the rough texture of the stone, the overwhelming smell of ale, these sensory details would be forever etched into their memory of the illicit encounter. These were not romantic settings found in courtly love poems, but rather gritty, dangerous spaces born of necessity. The cellar, a place of storage and forgotten things, briefly transformed into a chamber for desperate love, a testament to the lengths medieval couples would go to steal a moment of connection in a world that sought to control every aspect of their lives and affections. Number 5. Beneath the bleachers at a tournament. Tournaments were the spectacular events of the medieval world, drawing crowds from far and wide. Knights in gleaming armor jousted for honor and glory, archers tested their skill, and the air thrummed with excitement, the roar of the crowd, and the blare of trumpets. Grandstands, often wooden structures hastily erected for the occasion, provided elevated seating for the nobility and wealthier townsfolk. Beneath these bleachers, however, lay a shadowy, cluttered space, usually filled with discarded straw, dropped food, and the general debris of a large public gathering. This overlooked area, despite its squalor, presented a unique, fleeting opportunity for forbidden lovers. Imagine the scene, hundreds of people cheering, music playing loudly, and the ground shaking with the thunder of hooves. This overwhelming sensory input acted as a perfect cover. The sheer noise made individual conversations impossible to discern, and the constant movement of the crowd meant that few eyes would be directed towards the dark recesses beneath the stands. A lady of the court, chaperoned by her ladies-in-waiting, or a merchant's daughter, watched by her family, might slip away under the pretense of seeking relief from the sun or retrieving a lost item, her lover. Perhaps a knight preparing for his bout, or a commoner working among the crowd, would already be waiting, having arranged the meeting through a secret signal or a trusted intermediary. The conditions beneath the bleachers were far from ideal. The ground was uneven, the air thick with dust, and the smell of horses and bodies. It was cramped, dark, and uncomfortable. But for a couple desperate for a moment alone, these discomforts were minor concerns. The true danger lay in discovery. While the crowds provided cover, they also increased the risk of accidental encounters. A drunken spectator stumbling around, a child retrieving a runaway ball, or a guard making a casual patrol could easily stumble upon the secret rendezvous. For a noble couple, the repercussions of being caught could be catastrophic. The lady would face public humiliation, potentially a forced marriage or even expulsion from court, bringing shame upon her entire family. The knight might be stripped of his honors, his reputation ruined, and his future prospects shattered. If one was already married, the accusation of adultery carried severe penalties, including imprisonment, fines, or even more brutal punishments depending on local laws and the status of the offended party. For those of lower social standing, public shaming, ostracism, or a forced quick marriage were common consequences. Despite these grave dangers, the thrill of the stolen moment, the desperate need for connection amidst the chaos, made the risk worthwhile. Quick embrace, a whispered word of comfort, or a secret plan, a shared look of longing. These were the precious treasures gained. Cacophony above would muffle their voices. The press of bodies would hide their movements, and for a few fleeting minutes, they existed in their own private world, a tiny island of forbidden desire in the midst of a grand public spectacle. The scent of trampled grass, the distant clang of steel, the muffled cheers of the crowd, these details would forever be linked to their dangerous secret. When their hurried moment was over, they would slip back into the surging mass of people, their hearts pounding, their minds already planning the next perilous encounter, if one could ever be arranged again. Number 6. The confessor's booth during off hours. Confessor's booth, or more accurately the private chamber where a priest would hear confessions, was a sacred and solemn space in a medieval church or monastery. It was a place of spiritual reckoning where sins were confessed and absolution sought. Typically, these were small enclosed rooms or alcoves designed to offer privacy for the penitent and the priest, allowing for intimate spiritual guidance. But for a select few forbidden lovers, this very privacy ironically offered a daring and sacrilegious opportunity for a clandestine meeting, especially during off hours when the church was quiet or seemingly empty. This was a profoundly risky location not just for social or legal reasons, but for spiritual ones too. To desecrate such a holy place with illicit earthly desires was considered a grave sin in itself, an act that could lead to excommunication or eternal damnation in the eyes of the deeply religious medieval society. Yet for desperate souls, the unique privacy it offered was too tempting to resist. The lovers involved might both be members of the clergy, perhaps a monk and a nun from nearby institutions, bound by strict vows of celibacy, whose forbidden love would mean utter ruin, eternal disgrace, and severe punishment if discovered. Or perhaps it was a married parishioner meeting a lover, using the guise of a spiritual consultation. Plan would require meticulous timing and a deep understanding of the church's daily rhythms. They would have to know when the church was least frequented, perhaps after the last evening service, or during the early morning hours before the first prayers began. The sexton, the church caretaker, would be the primary threat, along with any other clergy or devout individuals who might pass through. One might pretend to be seeking a private moment of prayer or claiming to have left something behind. The other would then slip in. Inside the small, enclosed space, the air would be cold and still, carrying the faint scent of old incense and dust. The only sounds would be their own nervous breathing and the pounding of their hearts. There would be little light, perhaps only the glow of a distant candle flickering on the altar. The consequences of discovery were severe beyond measure. For clergy, it meant public defrocking, imprisonment, or even a slow, torturous death. For lay people, especially those caught in adultery within such a sacred space, the punishment could be public penance, severe fines, or even corporal punishment. The community would view such an act with horror, seeing it as a blatant affront to God Himself. The weight of religious condemnation alone would be crushing, potentially condemning them in the eyes of everyone they knew, and perhaps more importantly to them in their own conscience. Despite this terrifying spiritual and social pressure, the confessor's booth offered a paradox. It was a place where secrets were meant to be revealed. But here, new, dangerous secrets were forged. It was a place of solitude, yet it harbored a clandestine coupling. The very darkness and stillness, meant for introspection and repentance, instead became a fleeting canvas for forbidden embraces and desperate whispers. The knowledge that they were standing on sacred ground defying not just human law but divine law, surely added a terrifying thrill to their stolen moments, a mix of fear and exhilarating rebellion. Chill of the stone walls, the faint echo of their own heartbeats, the sense of utter isolation within the hallowed space. These were the chilling hallmarks of their dangerous tryst, a testament to the desperate lengths love would go, even into the very heart of the sacred. Number 7. The ruined tower on the estate edge. Every large medieval estate, whether belonging to a lord, a monastery, or a wealthy merchant, often had a scattering of older, crumbling structures on its periphery. Among these, a ruined tower, perhaps a remnant of an earlier, smaller fortification, or a watchtower long fallen into disuse, was a common sight. These towers were often overgrown with ivy, their stone walls cracked and crumbling, their wooden floors long rotted away. They were generally avoided by most, deemed unsafe or simply useless. But for forbidden lovers, these forgotten ruins offered a perfect blend of isolation and proximity. The strategic advantage of a ruined tower lay in its location. It was usually far enough from the main manor house or village to offer a sense of privacy, yet close enough that a lover could plausibly slip away from their duties or household without arousing too much suspicion. A servant might claim to be gathering firewood, a stable boy looking for a stray animal, or a noble daughter taking a solitary walk. The dilapidated state of the tower meant few people would venture inside, making it a relatively undisturbed meeting point. Getting to the tower and entering it required caution. The paths leading to it were often overgrown, and the structure itself could be precarious. Loose stones, hidden holes, and crumbling masonry posed physical dangers. The lovers would have to navigate these hazards, often under the cover of dusk or early morning, ensuring no one saw them approach or leave together. Once inside, the tower's interior would be cold, damp, and filled with the musty smell of decay and earth. Dust motes would dance in any slivers of light that penetrated the narrow, broken windows. The silence within the ruins was profound, broken only by the wind whistling through the crevices or the occasional call of a bird nesting in the upper reaches. This silence was both a blessing and a curse. It allowed for intimate conversation, but also made any unexpected sound, like the approaching footstep or a breaking twig, immediately alarming. The risks of discovery were primarily from curious villagers, gamekeepers patrolling the estate, or for those of higher status, a suspicious family member or rival. A peasant couple might face public shaming or even violence from an angry father or a jealous suitor. A noble couple faced disinheritance, forced marriages, or in extreme cases imprisonment or even death if the affair was deemed to threaten property or lineage. Because these towers were often on the very edge of the estate, there was also the potential danger of outlaws or wandering vagabonds who might use the ruins as temporary shelter. Yet, in the skeletal embrace of the ruined tower, against the backdrop of history and decay, the lovers found a desperate solace. They could share a hurried embrace, whispered promises, or simply gaze upon each other, their hearts aching with longing. Cold stone, the broken archways, the wind echoing through empty chambers, these elements became silent witnesses to their secret. It was a place where time seemed slow, where the rigid rules of the medieval world momentarily faded, allowing two souls to connect in a forbidden, perilous dance. The knowledge that any moment could bring discovery added a sharp, poignant edge to their stolen moments, making every touch and every word intensely precious. Number 8. The underneath of the Great Bridge. Medieval towns and cities, particularly those situated on major rivers or trade routes, were often defined by their impressive bridges. These were not just functional crossings, but often architectural marvels, built with strong stone arches, sometimes even lined with shops or houses. While the bridge tops were bustling public spaces, a different world existed beneath them. The underside of these great structures, where the stone arches met the riverbanks, was usually a dark, damp, and secluded area, often muddy from the water and littered with debris washed up by the currents. For forbidden lovers, this overlooked space offered a surprising, though risky, opportunity for a clandestine meeting. Imagine the constant flow of life above, carts rumbling, merchants shouting, people walking by, their conversations lost to the river's murmur and the general urban din. This incessant noise and activity provided a perfect sound buffer for those below. The arches themselves created natural alcoves and hiding spots, shielding couples from casual view. A young man and woman, perhaps from different social classes, or forbidden to marry due to family feuds or existing betrothals, might arrange to meet here. The woman might pretend to be doing laundry by the riverbank or gathering reeds. The man might be feigning a fishing trip, or simply passing by on his way to work. They would approach the meeting point separately, careful not to draw attention, and then slip into the shadows beneath the arches. The conditions were far from comfortable. The ground was likely muddy and uneven, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and river water. Insects would buzz in the stagnant pockets of air. The river itself, while providing natural background noise, could also be dangerous, with strong currents or sudden floods. But for the lovers, these discomforts were minor. Their focus was on the precious stolen moments of privacy. The greatest risk was discovery. While the archways offered concealment from above, anyone walking along the riverbank could stumble upon them. Fishermen, washerwomen, or even a child playing near the water could become accidental witnesses. The city watch occasionally patrolled the riverbanks for suspicious activity or bodies, adding another layer of danger. Rumors spread quickly in medieval towns, and a sighting even by chance could lead to public humiliation, a forced marriage, or severe punishment, depending on the status of the individuals and the nature of their transgression. For those of higher standing, the shame would be immense, affecting their entire family's honor and standing. Yet, in the cool, echoing embrace of the stone arches, with the river flowing steadily by, the lovers found a desperate intimacy. They could exchange hurried whispers, a stolen kiss, or a silent, longing glance, their hearts pounding against the rough texture of the ancient stone. The sound of the river, a constant soothing drone, seemed to conspire with them, washing away the evidence of their forbidden tryst. It was a place where the rigid rules of medieval society felt momentarily distant, a temporary sanctuary beneath the weight of the bustling world above. These brief, perilous moments, infused with the smell of damp stone and flowing water, were a testament to the lengths to which passion would drive individuals in an era where love was often a luxury and privacy a dangerous fantasy. Number 9. The castle's outer bailey, after curfew. The outer bailey of a medieval castle was a hive of activity during the day. It housed stables, workshops, barracks for soldiers, and often temporary structures for merchants and servants. It was the bustling heart of the castle's everyday life, constantly under the watchful eyes of guards, squires, and castle staff. But after curfew, when the portcullis was lowered, the gates barred, and the common folk retired to their crowded quarters, the outer bailey transformed into a desolate, quiet space, illuminated only by the faint glow of torches from the inner keep or the pale light of the moon. For forbidden lovers within the castle walls, this empty expanse, though monitored, offered a daring opportunity for a secret meeting. The challenge was immense. Guards patrolled the walls and gateways, their footsteps echoing on the cobblestones. Sentries stood vigilant in watchtowers. Every shadow could conceal a threat, and every sound could betray their presence. Yet, for a lady of the court, perhaps smitten with a young squire, or a knight with a passion for a servant girl, the outer bailey provided a dangerous stage for their illicit drama. Timing of such a meeting had to be meticulously planned. It would have to be during the darkest hours of the night, when most were asleep and the patrols were less frequent. The lovers would have to slip out of their respective chambers, silently navigating dark corridors and creaking stairs, avoiding any sleeping servants or watchful chamberlains. Once in the bailey, they would have to move stealthily, keeping to the deepest shadows cast by the stable blocks or the outer walls, their senses heightened to every sound, every shift in the wind. Atmosphere in the outer bailey at night was stark and unforgiving. The air would be cold, carrying the scent of damp earth, horses, and stale smoke from the extinguished fires. The vastness of the space would make them feel exposed, despite the shadows. The only sounds might be the distant snort of a horse, the rustle of straw, or the steady, measured footsteps of a guard. The risks of discovery were astronomical. If caught, the consequences would be dire beyond measure. For a noblewoman, it would mean public disgrace, potentially forced cloistering in a convent, or a swift, humiliating marriage to cover the scandal, often to a far less desirable match. For a knight or noble man, it could mean loss of favor, banishment, or worse. For servants, it might involve harsh beatings, dismissal, or even execution, especially if the liaison crossed social boundaries or involved a high-status individual. Treachery or espionage could even be suspected, adding to the severity of the punishment. Yet, for a brief, terrifying moment, amidst the cold stone walls of the mighty fortress, two souls found a desperate connection. Quick embrace, a whispered exchange of longing, a shared look of desperate affection. These were the only treasures they sought. The knowledge that any moment could bring the clatter of a guard's armor, the shout of an alarm, or the sudden glare of a torchlight added a terrifying thrill to their stolen encounter. The looming presence of the castle walls, which usually symbolized safety and power, now felt like a giant, watchful prison. But for those precious seconds in the empty, silent bailey, their love dared to breathe a rebellious flame against the overwhelming darkness. Number 10. The Market Square at Dawn. The medieval market square was the pulsing heart of any town or city. During the day, it was a chaotic tapestry of sights, sounds, and smells. Merchants hawking their wares, farmers bringing their produce, artisans displaying their crafts, and the constant babble of 1,000 conversations. It was the ultimate public space, making a private meeting there seem utterly impossible. However, at the cusp of dawn, just as the first light began to creep over the rooftops and before the main bustle truly began, the market square transformed. It was a time when only a few early risers, the most dedicated vendors or cleaners, might be present, offering a slim window of opportunity for forbidden lovers. Imagine the silence broken only by the chirping of birds, the distant crow of a rooster, or the creak of a cartwheel as a solitary vendor set up their stall. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of dew-kissed cobblestones, fresh bread from the bakeries, and the lingering odors of yesterday's trade. This quiet calm was precisely what made it a tempting, albeit high-stakes, rendezvous point. A young baker's apprentice might arrange to meet a girl from a neighboring village who came to sell eggs, or a tailor's daughter might share a secret with a visiting artisan. They would approach the square from different directions, pretending to be on an early errand. The woman might carry an empty basket, the man perhaps a small tool or a package, as if returning from a delivery. Their eyes would constantly scan the square, alert to any approaching figures. The challenge was to appear casual, blending in with the few legitimate early morning activities while still seeking out their beloved. They might linger near a fountain, or pretend to examine goods at a vendor's stall, their hands brushing, their eyes meeting in a silent, desperate language. The danger lay in the gradual awakening of the town. As the sun rose higher, more people would begin to arrive, and the chance of being seen by someone who knew them, or someone who was simply too observant, increased with every passing minute. The consequences of discovery in such a public space could be immediate and devastating. For a peasant couple, it might lead to public shaming, ostracization, or a forced marriage to protect reputations. For those of higher status, perhaps a nobleman meeting a commoner, the scandal would be immense, threatening their social standing, their arranged marriages, and even their family's honor. Gossip was the currency of medieval towns, and a sighting in the market square, however innocent it might seem, could quickly fuel a destructive rumor. Yet in those fleeting, chilly moments, surrounded by the promise of a new day and the hushed preparations of the market, they found a desperate kind of intimacy. Quick, shared glance, a hand brushing, a whispered word of comfort or longing. These were the precious moments they risked everything for. Cold stone of the market square beneath their feet, the faint morning mist, the gradual awakening of the world around them, these sensory details would be forever linked to their perilous secret. They knew their time was short, that the quiet solitude would soon give way to the clamor of the day, forcing them back into their separate lives. But for those brief seconds, under the silent witness of the rising sun, their forbidden love dared to exist. Number 11. The graveyard at midnight. The medieval graveyard was a place steeped in reverence and superstition. It was the resting place of generations, surrounded by the parish church, and often enclosed by a stone wall. During the day, it might be visited by mourners or those taking a contemplative stroll, but at night, it became a desolate, eerie place, largely avoided by the superstitious townsfolk who feared restless spirits or darker forces. For forbidden lovers, this very fear and isolation offered a compelling, albeit chilling, sanctuary for a secret meeting. Imagine the scene: the moon, if visible, casting long, distorted shadows among the crooked tombstones and ancient yew trees. The air would be heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. The only sounds might be the rustle of unseen creatures, the distant hoot of an owl, or the whisper of the wind through the tall grass. This profound silence and isolation, coupled with the prevailing fear of the dead, meant very few people would dare to venture into the graveyard after dark, making it an ideal clandestine spot. A young couple, perhaps from families feuding or with disparate social standings that forbade their union, might agree to meet here. One might pretend to visit a deceased relative, using the excuse of a private moment of mourning. The other would then slip in through a quiet gate or over a low wall, shrouded in a dark cloak to avoid detection. They would navigate the uneven ground, stepping carefully around graves, their hearts pounding not just from fear of discovery, but perhaps from the eerie atmosphere itself. The risks were multifaceted. Superstition was rampant in the medieval period, and being caught in a graveyard at midnight could easily lead to accusations of witchcraft, dark magic, or consorting with spirits, especially if they were seen performing any unusual gestures. These accusations could lead to trials, torture, or even execution. Beyond the supernatural fears, practical dangers existed. The uneven ground could lead to a fall, and any watchman or passing traveler who did brave the graveyard might stumble upon them. Moreover, the very act of using a sacred space for a secret, potentially illicit encounter was considered a grave sin in itself by the deeply religious society. Despite these terrifying risks, the graveyard offered an unparalleled sense of privacy and timelessness. Amidst the eternal slumber of the departed, the lovers could find a raw, desperate intimacy. They might cling to each other, their whispers lost among the shadows of the silent stones. Quick embrace, a shared word of love or despair, a desperate plan for their future. These were the precious moments they carved out of the forbidden night. Cold stone of the gravestones, the spectral light of the moon, the lingering chill in the air. These sensory details would forever be etched into their memory of the dangerous tryst. It was a place where life and death met, where the intensity of their forbidden passion was amplified by the chilling proximity to the silent realm of the dead, making every touch, every breath fiercely precious. Number 12. The hidden alcove in the monastic library. Monasteries were centers of learning and devotion in the medieval world, housing vast collections of precious manuscripts in their libraries. These libraries were often large, echoing spaces, filled with the hushed rustle of turning pages and the faint scent of parchment and old ink, while monks spent hours poring over texts and scribes meticulously copied new ones. There were often smaller, less frequented corners, obscure alcoves, or even hidden passages, leading to secret rooms within these hallowed halls. For a monk or nun grappling with forbidden earthly desires, or for a lay scholar or artist working within the monastery who fell for someone they should not, these quiet, forgotten spots offered a daring, sacred, and extremely dangerous place for a clandestine meeting. Imagine the quiet, focused atmosphere, the only sounds being the occasional cough or the scratching of a quill. The air would be cool, often lit only by the soft glow of natural light from high windows or the flickering flame of a carefully shielded candle. In such a setting, the discovery of a secret meeting would not just be scandalous, it would be blasphemous. A monk might feign intense study of a rare text, positioning himself near a secluded shelf or a small overlooked reading nook. His beloved, perhaps a novice nun from a nearby convent, a lay artist commissioned to illustrate a manuscript, or even a visiting noblewoman with an intellectual curiosity, would arrive under a similar pretense, claiming to be researching illumination. They would then slip into the chosen alcove, relying on the pervasive silence and the absorption of others in their studies to provide cover. The risks were profound. Monastic life was strictly regulated, with schedules, routines, and constant observation. The abbot or prioress, along with other senior clergy, would be vigilant against any breaches of celibacy or social order. The discovery of a romantic liaison within the walls of a monastery, especially for those who had taken vows, meant utter ruin. Excommunication, public defrocking, imprisonment, severe penance, or even death, depending on the specifics of the vow and the power of the church. For lay people involved, it could mean public shaming, ostracism, or worse. The weight of divine judgment and eternal damnation would also hang heavily over such an act. Yet, in the hushed embrace of the monastic library, surrounded by centuries of spiritual wisdom and the silent judgment of ancient texts, the lovers found a desperate connection. They could exchange hurried whispers, a stolen glance, or a brief trembling touch, their hands brushing across the cold parchment of an open book. The faint scent of aged paper, the echoing silence, the knowledge that every minute was fraught with peril, these details intensified their stolen moments. The very solemnity of the place, meant for spiritual communion, was repurposed for an earthly forbidden passion, adding a layer of ironic defiance to their dangerous tryst. The hidden alcove, a sanctuary for knowledge, briefly became a clandestine haven for forbidden love, a testament to the powerful force that drove individuals to defy the most sacred vows and societal norms in the medieval world.